Boom.
All right. All right. We are, ladies and gentlemen, this is the 71st episode of the Secular Foxhole podcast, and we are live with philosopher Andrew Bernstein. And we're here to talk about his latest pamphlet, The Truth About Climate Change. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Hi Blair, hi Martin. I'm good. How are you guys?
That's
Here's
right.
the booklet, The Truth About Climate Change. So, thanks for having me on. This is a topic that's fascinated me for a long time. So I appreciate the opportunity to discuss it.
Good. Good. All right. Yeah. So, my first question is, why would a philosopher uh, become interested in climate change, the whole spectrum of climate change?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So I'm not a scientist. I say that right from the start. In fact, some leftist supporter of the AGW hypothesis, anthropogenic global warming or man-made global warming, said to me, she said, "Why should I listen to what a philosopher has to say about climate change?" Which is a reasonable question. And I said to her, "Well, I know as much about climate change as does Al Gore."
But invented the internet. So yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Which has a lot to do with climate change, doesn't it? Anyway, he's got a bachelor's degree in government from Harvard. So he graduated from Harvard. Two thumbs up for him. But
Yeah.
his degree is in government. Greta Thunberg, a poor kid, seems paralyzed with fear. I don't know how much she's a kid. I don't know how much she actually knows about climate change, but people
Yeah.
seem to listen
And
to
she
her.
had some spin doctor behind her, and that's another story that I could include in the show notes. How
Okay.
that come
All
up.
right.
Yeah.
All right, but anyhow, seriously, these questions are not decided by academic pedigree. That my degrees in philosophy, Al Gore's is in government. These issues are decided by evidence. What does the evidence show? And I'm not a scientist, but I've taught logic for 40 years, and I know how to support a conclusion with evidence. So I've been fascinated by this issue going back to 1988 when James Hansen at NASA, first started talking about catastrophic man-made warming. And fortunately for us, climate scientists write books, including for us, The Intelligent Language. And I've done a lot of research on this issue over the decades. It's fascinating, and so I thought that having a rational epistemology and knowing logic as well as I do, and having done a lot of research on the specifics of the climate science, I thought I could write an effective, rational, short synopsis of what the truth about climate change is.
Well, having read it, I agree. It's extremely cogent and very well laid out, Andy. So
Thank
it's
you.
very much appreciated. But
But
what
one
is?
thing that's often overlooked in the discussion is, a lot of the HEW supporters, like the IPCC and and so on, they focus on the last few hundred years, which, okay, that's reasonable. You given
Okay,
the human
but
life expectancy, but the Earth has a history of something like 4.5 or 4.6 billion, with a B as in boy, billion years, and has a vast climate history. And what I want to do, Ayn Rand taught us. I assume most of your viewers are familiar with Ayn Rand. But if maybe I shouldn't make that assumption. She's a famous novelist of The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, developed the philosophic system of objectivism. If you haven't read The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, I strongly recommend you to do so. These are great
Yes,
novels. But she always taught us in terms of epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How do we gain knowledge? See the big picture, integrate, go as wide as we can. Show how a phenomenon fits in, into the big picture. And to try to understand modern warming without integrating it into Earth's climate history is like trying to understand the cause, analogous, I think, to trying to understand the causes of World War II without understanding the rise of totalitarianism in several European countries, early 20th century. When you plug it into this vast climate history, then you see, the Earth has cycled endlessly.
yeah,
The warm
Sure.
periods, the colder periods, and there have been many periods that are a lot warmer than today, long before human beings ever appeared on the planet, never mind industrialized, which is late 18th century British development. So once you put it in the big picture, I think we could better discuss the causes, the effects, of modern warming.
Yeah. What is the issue surrounding CO2 emissions? Is it they claim it's a dramatic rise. What is the actual?
Dramatic. I'm sorry for laughing. I think the scientists pretty much agree that around the time of the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century Britain, uh, CO2 levels were approximately 280 parts per million of the atmosphere.
Okay. All right.
And today, 200 and some odd years later, roughly 420 parts per million. So there's no doubt that it's risen, but when you're right, when they say risen dramatically, it's a head scratcher because the CO2 levels, the truth is CO2 levels today are lower and significantly lower than they have been through much of the Earth's vast history. I mean, during the go back into geological time, and great geologists write books. Doug McDougall's book "Frozen Earth" was one I read. About the ice ages, one I read and learned a lot. He's a geology professor at one of the California universities. In the what period? No, what period was that? Cambrian. The Cambrian period, roughly 540 million years ago, CO2 levels were 7,000 parts per million, not 420. There was 7,000 parts per million. And in keeping with the CO2 theory, the Earth was very warm. Today they say it's roughly 59 degrees Fahrenheit. And I always forget the conversion to Celsius, but it's 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, the Earth's spectrum historically over geological time has been from 50 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 or 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, the Earth is roughly 59 degrees. So it's by several degrees, it's slightly closer to the cooler end of its historic spectrum than toward its warmer end. But in the Cambrian, when the CO2 levels were that high, the temperature was 70 or 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The Earth was very warm. That's when, tropical flora and fauna were found north of the Arctic Circle, and crocodiles lived, that far north. But at those levels, plant life must have just been abundant, because plants thrive in warm weather and higher levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. But in contradiction to the CO2 theory, when the Earth was that warm, that was the period known as the Cambrian explosion, which was not a literal eruption. It's not a volcanic eruption. It's a metaphor for, the enormous increase in life forms that originated, including animal life forms that originated under those conditions. So those conditions were very, very, very favorable to life. So the CO2 levels have been. I'll give you one last data point. 100 million years later, roughly 440 million years ago, in the Ordovician period, CO2 levels were 4,500 parts per million, about 10 times what they are today. The Earth was so cold, it was in the grips of a severe glaciation. It's the Ordovician Ice Age, when CO2 levels were 10 times higher than what they are today. So that raises questions, about the power of CO2 to cause the catastrophic warming that the alarmists talk about.
Okay. You mentioned something that I think the left pounces on. They only use data from the Industrial Revolution, which you mean they want to smear capitalism and freedom.
That's right.
Instead of using the genuine science of, like, as you say, the entire history of the Earth. So, and you agree with that, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. We got to see the big picture. We have to integrate. When you're coming closer to our day, not hundreds of millions of years ago, but just thousands of years ago, the Minoan warm period, roughly 1500 to 1000 BC, so roughly 3,500 to 3,000 years ago. Dr. Tim Ball, Canadian climate scientist, who's PhD in climate science, unfortunately passed away not so long ago in his early 80s. But he points out the Minoan warm period, just 3,000 years ago, or a little more, was several degrees Celsius warmer than the Earth is today. There's a lot of proxy data, to support that. And you notice that the Earth cycle, just even ignoring for the moment the ice ages of over millions of years, the Earth gets colder and the ice advances. The Earth warms and the ice recedes. And very few people, actually, let me stay with the ice age for a minute. Very few people seem to realize, even educated people, that today in 2023, the Earth is in the midst of an ice age, the Pleistocene ice age. We're fortunate enough to be living in the Holocene interglacial warm period, but the ice is going to return at some point in the next 1,000 to 10,000 years. But anyway, even if we just leave aside the ice ages that cycle over millions of years, and just look in the last few thousand years, the Minoan warm period, like I said, roughly 3,500 years ago, followed by what's it's an unnamed cold period. Now that annoys me that it should be unnamed. So I took it upon myself. This guy thought out. I took it upon myself to name it. It's roughly, I think it was 600 BC to 200 BC or somewhere in that range. So I named it the biblical cold period. And if scientists don't like the reference to the Bible, fine. Let them name it. This is all these other periods have names. And following that was the Roman warm period, and following that was the Dark Age cold period. Following that was the medieval warm period, which we discussed a little bit before the show, when the Norse settled Greenland, grew crops on Greenland, thought even to name it Greenland, because things grew there, which I don't think they can today. So the medieval warm period, roughly 900 to 1300 AD, was at least as warm as it is today, maybe slightly warmer. Then the Little Ice Age, and today the modern warm period. So, I mean, just within the last 3,500 years, we see the Earth cycling between warmer and colder periods. And we should point out, it's in the warmer periods where life has flourished, not in the colder periods.
Okay. Now, you want one of the things you mentioned that I also liked is there seems to be a debate: climate versus weather. What's the difference?
As I understand it, climate, to put it simply, climate is long-term, weather is short-term. So,
So Andy, if you can't, predict the weather next week, how could you then say what the climate will be in?
Can't. Not today. And the leading climate scientists, Richard Lindzen from MIT, Patrick Michaels, University of Virginia, Fred Singer, who passed away, in his mid-90s, they all point out climate is so complex. There's so many factors that go into making up the climate at any given period, and there's so many factors that go into bringing about climate change that it is fatuous or simple to try to reduce it to one factor, such as carbon dioxide, and only to man-made carbon dioxide at that, overlooking the enormous amounts of CO2 spewed into the atmosphere by natural sources. That's one of the things. If I was going to be a scientist, I like the big picture. That's what drew me into philosophy. If I was to be a scientist, climate science would maybe the field, because there's so many factors involved. It's so complex. The variations in the emission of solar radiation, the sunspot cycle, is one factor. Henrik Svensmark, Danish astrophysicists, established that cosmic rays impacting, the atmosphere are largely responsible for cloud cover. And the more cloud cover, of course, the cooler, the Earth's surface will be. The oscillations of Earth's ocean currents, volcanic eruptions beneath the ocean floor, which warm the oceans, and then by evaporation, warm the atmosphere. And God knows what else. It's little understood.
Yeah, and Andy, I have to interrupt you there. I mean, you have done so much research on this, and when I read about the volcano, I got a bit scared. How prepared should we be? But it will something is boiling in under Earth.
I just lost I lost the picture for this. Are we back?
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, I
Can
see
see
you
you.
fine. I
Yeah.
see you fine, Andy.
Okay, great. What the question one was
Yeah,
how
you have done
scarce
so
we are
much
about volcanoes?
research and you have your footnotes, but when I read about the volcano and what could happen with, the outburst of the volcano and lava, I got a bit scared.
you know,
How do we prepare for that?
we should be scared.
Yeah,
Uh,
You move away. No.
yeah, no. Yeah, let me pick on start answering your question by picking
thanks.
on the beautiful actress Gwyneth Paltrow, who I like. She's a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
She's a very good actress. I respect her. But I don't know if you saw recently. She said something like, "I don't think anything natural can be bad for you." It's not going, guys. God, why don't you try eating feces? Don't try this at home, Gwyneth. But
Yeah.
you know, but volcanoes, but nature. You're right, Martin. Nature has this whole arsenal. Volcanoes and earthquakes and tidal waves and the bubonic plague and other diseases and uh, and one that gets recognized only in science fiction films. Bolide impact, a comet or a asteroid smashed into the earth, which has happened, and it's very dangerous. There's a lot of stuff to be scared of, and natural forces are vastly man-made. Climate change isn't one of them. It's
No.
what are rational risk assess. People do that for a living. Rational risk assessment guys. They say very nicely, people are afraid of all the wrong things. I had an old girlfriend who wouldn't fly. She wouldn't fly, but she smoked like 2 packs of cigarettes a day, but she wouldn't get in an airplane.
Oh boy.
So she drove. She drove from Houston to New York. It's not particularly dangerous, but it's much more dangerous than flying in, one of the major airlines. People are afraid of all the wrong things. So we're afraid of man-made warming, but yeah, volcanoes, massive volcanic eruption has caused terrible global cooling in the past because it spews so much, gazillions of tons of, dirt and grit and stuff into the atmosphere, blocks the sun's rays for up to a year or 2 years at a time, which kills off a lot of plant life, which is the foundation of the food chain. That's vastly more dangerous. Cooling is much more harmful than warming. Warming is generally good to life. It's the cooler periods that are harmful. Volcanoes are one cause of that, Martin. You're right.
Agreed. Now, and this is an old term, but the IPCC and all the government-paid scientists use computer modeling, and I think it's basically just garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, GIGO, that old term.
Yeah, GIGO.
Yeah.
So you agree with the
Yeah. The basic premise of the IPCC and of the AGW theorists more broadly.
What do they stand for, this acronym?
Yeah, IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a body of science, a group of
United
scientists
Nations.
under UN jurisdiction. AGW is anthropogenic warming or anthropogenic global warming or man-made global warming. The IPCC, the basic premise is that human CO2 emissions is what drives rising temperatures. So that's how they program the computer. And notice the premise is programmed in. And notice a couple of points. Since over the last 140 years, since the 1880s, I think scientists generally agree the Earth's temperature has risen by roughly 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is not very much historically, by the way. It's very mild warming, and today it's warming. Excuse me. The satellite data, the most reliable data we have, shows us that the Earth is warming at roughly the clip of 0.15 degrees Celsius per decade, which is, again, it's mild. 0.15 degrees Celsius per decade is mild. Historically, there's been much wider swings than that. But so anyway, 1.2 degrees Celsius over 140 years, according to the IPCC projections on the right, given the rising CO2 levels, the Earth should have warmed by roughly 2.3 degrees Celsius, which is almost twice, the observed warming. So and they project, CO2 levels continue to rise. The Earth should be accelerating in warming, and it's not. It's still the same gentle, 0.15 degrees Celsius per decade rate. It's not accelerating the way it should, given the IPCC's basic premise of your rising CO2 levels cause an accelerating rate of rising temperatures. So the computer models are simply false. They're mistaken. They're not getting their projections don't match real world observations. And what do you do with a theory who's consistently at odds with the observed data? Well, the theory's wrong.
Yeah,
CO2 is only one issue in warming. There is a greenhouse effect, but it's only one issue. And I think when we discussed the Ordovician Ice Age, when you had CO2 levels at 4,500 parts per million, and the Earth was in an ice age, that raises questions. Maybe CO2 is a factor, but maybe it's not the most powerful factor. Maybe there are other factors that are more powerful that at times overpower it.
Yeah. So then, as Claire has written here a question, when we, in a way, should maybe be proud to say that we are not climate change denier because it changes, but that's the smear tactics. Do you want to discuss that a bit?
Yeah, that's a good point. No, if the AGW, the alarmist says, and if AGW theorists were honest, they would simply call us skeptics. We're skeptical about their theory. But deniers, that I think is a deliberate attempt to link us to Holocaust.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's dishonest.
Yep.
So yeah, I made the point in the pamphlet here, The Truth About Climate Change, that I'm looking at the big picture historically, and seeing endless climate change, endless. In fact, I raised the question: the climate periods, are they always changing? Nature's dynamic. The climate period's always changing, and my guess is that they are. Certainly has changed a lot over millions and millions and millions of years. So I am a big time climate change affirmer. Well, I am affirming natural climate change without any human input. Massive climate change long before the Earth, roughly 4.6 billion years old. Our earliest ancestors, roughly 5 million years ago, with an M as in Mary. And there's been massive climate change, including ice ages and the end of ice ages, and then more ice ages, long before our earliest ancestors ever appear in the fossil record. So we can definitely say, without a doubt, there's a lot of things about climate change that we don't know. One thing we can say without a doubt is there is a natural climate cycle that goes on without any human input, and we need to understand the natural climate cycle before we can discern any human input into it.
So and Blair will come with that also, but then maybe the root is about religion in a way, a new type of religion.
Yeah.
Like environmentalism. That is, you can't say something about it.
Yeah, that's it does. It is akin to religion in that it's terribly authoritarian and they will not tolerate dissent. I see it in the United States, and I think it's just as bad, maybe worse, in parts of Europe.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, where there's no historic, there's not an amendment to the Constitution protecting freedom of speech, right? As there is in the United States. But even so, you see people deplatformed off of social media platforms because they're skeptical of AGW or other things. But including AGW, people get canceled from their professorships in the university or from their jobs in corporate America because they disagree with the left's take on leftist orthodoxy on climate change and or other issues. And the most terrifying thing to me of all is the censorship that we're starting to see in the United States, including on climate change. Let's establish a disinformation governance board at the Department of Homeland Security, which is a criminal justice agency, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I dissent from what the government says, does that mean armed federal agents are going to show up at my door and arrest me? I mean, why else have it at a criminal justice organization? But it's censorship. We see the FBI, the Twitter files show the FBI coaching, Twitter and probably other social media platforms on who can speak and who will be suppressed. And part of the suppression is of, AGW skeptics. So it's authoritarian, like Christianity at its worst 1,000 years ago, Judaism several thousand years ago, and the Orthodox Jews completely suppressed, or Islam in our day. It is authoritarian like a religion. And another religious element is, and this was not only ironic, but is scary and heartbreaking. This is supposed to be based on science.
Right.
And yet scientists, or the presentation of, I'm not a scientist, but I have evidence here, and if I get to be known on this, they'll probably they'll cancel me like they have any number of other people. The evidence doesn't matter if you have the evidence. In fact, it may be worse for you if you have the evidence, because then you're a greater threat to them, and they will cancel you, or censor you. So it is like a religion in that regard.
So
making science, and accept the science, trust the science, follow the science. And the truth is, no, science isn't something to be trusted or followed. It's something to be questioned. Richard Feynman, one last point, I know you had another question. The great Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner, who worked on, just saw the movie Oppenheimer. Feynman worked on the Manhattan Project when he was like 21 years old.
Wow.
Or something. But Feynman had a great quote. He died a long time ago. It was 1980s, I think. But
maybe, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But Feynman said, "I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." Now that's science.
That's science, yes. Now, so my follow-up question is a philosophical one. Then, how did science become so politicized?
Yeah. Yeah, that's.
I mean, Richard Saltzman pointed this out in one of our episodes, where he said that the powers that be took advantage of the American people's trust or love of science to basically fool us into thinking about the COVID vaccines and about this, that, and the other. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it was, in other words, the American people were taken advantage of, and that because of I'll use the word trust in science, but I guess, again, how does it become so politicized? What?
No, that's a very good question. There's a couple of things that I wanted to say on this. Trust in American people's trust in, and also ignorance of.
Well, sure.
Because I just wrote a book on education. In fact, we discussed it on your show, right?
Oh, yeah.
Why Johnny still can't read or write or think, read or write or understand math, and what we could do about it. The science curriculum has been terribly diluted for 100 years now. Today, a lot of what passes for science in the American schools is basically global warming propaganda.
Yeah. So, I can vouch for that, because our dog walker, she was spouting some stuff the other day. So
students, good kids. They're good kids.
Yeah.
They're
Oh, they're great. She's a great kid.
Yeah.
And it's just like, all right, I'm going to buy Andy's book for her.
I know. I have students. When this comes up in class, I have students who say, "Well, the Earth's warmer today than it has been, right?" And I have to stop myself from laughing. It's no, it's, where CO2 levels are higher than they ever have. No, but this is what they're being taught or dogmatized with in the school system. So the ignorance of, but the scientists, and here's some good news here. There's good news and bad news. The good news is that many scientists are not politicized, and and they'll tell the truth. And a really, really, really good book on this is Lawrence Solomon's book, The Deniers. He interviews several dozen world-class scientists on these issues, and they express a great deal of skepticism about AGW. Some of them are IPCC reviewers and IPCC scientists, and questioning the IPCC's methodology. The Deniers is a terrific book by Lawrence Solomon. It shows how many scientists, anybody who's been brainwashed with that 97% belief that 97% of scientists or 97% of climate scientists agree with AGW. They could read Lawrence Solomon's book, The Deniers, and they'll say, my God, how many leading scientists reject various aspects of the whole thing of the AGW theory. The IPCC is heavily politicized. They're under the UN jurisdiction. Sure. They're leftists. The goal here isn't for them, it isn't to get at the truth about climate change. The goal here is to push us into socialism. Because if we can blame catastrophic warming on the emission of CO2, we can take over the UN. It gives us plausibility, moral argument to take over the energy industry, to take over
industrial policy, yes,
nationalize major industries, and I think those guys are heavily politicized. Here's one data point that people don't know, but Tim Ball points it out. By the way, Dr. Tim Ball, the Canadian climate scientist, wrote a really good book. Just get the title. It's Human-Caused Warming, the Biggest Deception in History. And it's a very thin book. I think everybody should read it. It's got just chock-a-block with information. But
hopefully it's still in print.
I think it is. He died recently. I think it is. But here's how the IPCC operates. And this is the 1995 report. I don't think their methodology has changed since. He quotes from the IPCC gets some of the leading scientists in the world, thousands of them, to investigate the issue. Then they write a massive science report, which nobody but a few scientists reads. And then somebody at the hierarchy of the IPCC writes the summary for policymakers, the SPM, which is the only thing that's read by journalists, politicians, and so on. Well, the scientists in the 1995 report, I don't remember the exact wording, but said, we need to understand the natural climate cycle in order to discern any human element. That was part of their conclusion. Well, Ben Santer, one of the head guys at the IPCC, inserted into that chapter that unquestionably the warming is caused by human beings. Now, how many times have we heard that since 1995? It comes from the IPCC. These are the scientists, investigating, climate change. Well, no, it doesn't. The scientists said there's natural forces we need to understand, in order to discern any human causation. Ben Santer inserted, it's unquestionably human. And he completely contradicted what the scientists, wrote. It's just breathtakingly dishonest. And I don't think the IPCC's methodology has changed over the last, 28 years.
I know you. One of the things I found funny, and astonishingly terrible, was that there's a group of scientists, or a particular scientist, that denies the sun has anything to do with climate or something like that.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Oh, yeah. I won't mention their names.
No.
But, one of the colleges where I teach, the chair of the environmental science department, who's got a PhD in environmental science, said to me, that's the exact quote, when I was, talking about the sun, he said, quote, the sun has nothing to do with it. You know, that's part of the dogma. The IPCC decided back in the 90s, and they hold to it to this day, that we're not concerned, we, the IPCC, we're not concerned to investigate any natural causes of warming. We're concerned only to find the man-made causes of warming. And that's what they look for. And they simply ignore, you know, as Ayn Rand might say, evade. So what about all the climate change of the past, long before human beings ever industrialized? Well, blank out, right? We just ignore that. That's impossible. That's an impossible methodology. We know there's a natural climate cycle. That's unquestionable. At this point, we would give it ice ages and everything else. We need to find out what are the natural causes of climate change in order to be able to identify any, you know, human element that, if there is any, that now exists. It's impossible to discern the human element if we don't know the natural causes of the climate cycle.
Yeah, if you don't have the information from
you
the whole
in a
spectrum.
vast vacuum. It's dumb. I mean, if these guys were honest, you just say this is stupid. You know, say this is, as a teacher of logic, I would say this is the fallacy of stupidity. You're overlooking the all this massive cause, you know, natural causation.
Well, they have to keep the taxpayer money rolling in, I guess. The fund, you know, government fund grants and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. That's the only reason then. That's the only reason.
But one reason is that's the way to get the grants, and the other reason is we're communists. We're pushing what we want to push the political climate into communism. And supporting your point about the money rolling, Dr. Judith Curry, climate scientist at Georgia Tech, a couple of years ago.
I remember that. Yes, she got thrown out of Georgia Tech.
She resigned.
Oh, okay.
She resigned. You know, what she said was really poignant. She said, you know, work with my graduate students, and in order to teach them to be effective scientists, I have to teach them to question, you know, the AGW hypothesis. But in order to help them gain employment and grants, I have to teach them to not question the AGW hypothesis. And that tension, that contradiction, I can't live that out. And she resigned, which I thought was a real act of integrity.
Yes, yeah.
She went on strike.
Well, good for her then. Yeah, that was a little longer than a couple of years ago, but yeah, I remember that. So Andy, let's I got one final question then. So what can one person do to counter the religion of environmentalism?
Well, here's what I think my little booklet is helpful, because they don't have to read all these books written by climate scientists, although people can certainly do that too, because I've incorporated a lot of that.
That's some great information in the book.
Yeah, and if they're going to read one or two books in addition to my small book, Lawrence Solomon's The Deniers, Fred Singer, great climate scientist, passed away a few years ago in his mid-90s, wrote an excellent book, Unstoppable Global Warming Every 1,500 Years, about the natural climate change cycle, again, filled with data. If you read my book or read a couple of books on this, get the information, and then speak out. Speak up, in any form available to us, whether you have a podcast or whether you're just talking to your neighbors or family members or your best friends, or, you know, they say the truth will out. Well, it won't if we don't speak up. But if we do, if we speak up and educate ourselves first, and then speak up and speak out, we have the evidence. The evidence is very strong that the natural climate cycle is at work here. Much stronger than the AGW hypothesis.
Let's throw a plug in for Alex Epstein's book Fossil Future as well.
Yeah, Alex Epstein's The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, a very good book. What's his new book? His latest one? I forgot.
It's called Fossil Future: Why We Need More Coal and Oil and
Alex Epstein's a very good source of information on these issues. Absolutely right.
All right, well, Andy.
Yeah, and at the end of the book, you mentioned also you had lots of resources and notes, and you had some websites also. One with the witty URL. What's up with that? For
Oh
example.
yeah, Anthony Watts. Anthony Watts is a meteorologist,
Yeah.
and he has a very valuable website. Watts, WATTS.
Yeah.
What's up with that is very good. And Dr. Roy Spencer,
Yeah.
the NASA. He's a PhD in meteorology. He's a great NASA scientist. His website, drroyspencer.com. In fact, it was from Roy Spencer that I learned another data point here that at least 95% of the CO2 spewed into the atmosphere annually comes from natural sources, not man-made ones.
Hmm.
So, and then Tim Ball said more like 96 to 97% is natural. So we're not just focused on CO2, which is one factor of many, but on the tiny fraction of man-made CO2, which is a fraction of a secondary cause in the first place.
Yeah, but we don't talk about the cows.
The cows, right? Well, doesn't Bill Gates say we have to stop eating beef for that reason?
Yeah, that's the next thing.
That's the next thing. Yeah.
So we have to get rid of the so-called smog. That was also cited when it was a Norwegian scientist that you mentioned in the book, and when he was mentioned in D Smog website.
Was that Tom Segelstad you talking
Yes.
about?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a brilliant geologist. He was an IPCC reviewer, and he's sharply critical of IPCC's knowledge of one, geology or earth processes, and two, their methodology.
It's funny you don't hear any of that stuff in the media.
Not from the lion leftist media.
Yeah, but you hear it here, and you can then support our work and our podcast and send us donation through real money, Bitcoin, Satoshis. And please plug your book again, Andy.
Well, thank you, guys. Yeah, the truth about climate change. It's a booklet. It's available from Amazon. It's only like $2 as a Kindle, and maybe $8 as a.
It's $8 as a paperback, and I think $4.99 is the Kindle. But that's well worth every penny.
Wouldn't that be a great thing, buy in paperback and send out to different institutions and places, high places, your book?
Oh yeah, there's a way. Yeah, thank you, Mon. There's a way to fight the madness.
Yeah,
that's true.
What is it now? $8 in paperback? Is that?
Yes, it is $8.
Yeah, so that's not a lot for many people. You can buy, dozens or even hundreds, scores or hundreds of copies and send them to people who you think are rational and honest, who are open to it. It's senseless to send it to Al Gore, but Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, or people who are just committed to the AGW hypothesis, but people who have some influence in the culture, have some voice, and who you think are basically honest. Yeah, you could get as many teachers, professors, writers, journalists, filmmakers, even some politicians.
And here I have an idea. Maybe that could be like a children's version also, like you have done this about reading Rand's literature. What do you call it? The black and yellow books.
Oh, the
Cliff Notes.
Cliff Notes, yeah.
The Cliff Notes.
And do a similar one on your book for children, and maybe like Bosch Fossman could illustrate them or something like that. Could be something for the future project.
See if we get into the school system, right?
Yeah.
Because there are still some very good classroom teachers in the school system. There's still honest people there. That's a good idea, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah. Great.
All right. Well, we've been talking with Andrew Bernstein, who my dear friend calls the Arthur Fonzarelli of objectivism.
The Fonz. Yeah, I love the Fonz.
And Andy, thanks for manning the foxhole with us today.
Well, thanks, guys. Always good to be in the foxhole with you, and I look forward to getting the link, and I will paste it across social media.
Thanks. Right. Well, give us your website and all that other good stuff quick.
Oh yeah, it's andrewbernstein.net. www.andrewbernstein.net. You can reach me on my Facebook page, on Twitter, So, I am very modern, very, on LinkedIn.
it.
I am very plugged. I'm very plugged into social media.
Great.
The fans,
Nice.
the fans would have to, hey, you have to get it out there, right? So,
That's good. And now I will do the stop recording. So please